I knew something was off the moment Dominic closed the door behind us. Not in a loud, obvious way. Nothing dramatic. It was subtle, too subtle. The kind of shift you only notice if you've known someone long enough to feel when they're not acting like themselves. Dominic had been my older brother's best friend for years. The kind of guy who just fit into our house like he belonged there. He was always around movie nights, random dinners, weekends that somehow turned into 3-day hangouts. Growing up, he felt more like a second brother than anything else. But that was before I turned 21. Before I started noticing things I probably shouldn't have. And definitely before tonight. It wasn't supposed to be anything special. My brother had to leave last minute, some emergency shift at work, and Dominic had already come over by the time he got the call. They talked for a bit, then my brother grabbed his keys, apologized, and said he'd be back late, which left just the two of us. Alone. First, it felt normal. Too normal, even. We sat on the couch, flipping through Netflix, arguing over what to watch like we always did. Dominic stretched out like he owned the place, one arm thrown over the back of the couch, his legs spread casually. Same Dominic. Same easy energy. Except, it wasn't. I noticed it when I laughed at something stupid on the screen, and he didn't laugh with me. He just looked at me, not in a casual way, not like someone watching a friend react to a joke. It lingered, a second too long. "You good?" I asked, glancing over. He blinked, like I'd pulled him out of something. Yeah, I'm good." But he didn't look away right away, and that's when I felt it, that weird, tight feeling in my chest. The kind you get when something's about to shift, but you don't know how yet. I turned back to the TV, trying to ignore it, trying to act normal, because that's what this was, right? Just a normal night. Except it didn't stay that way. A little later, I got up to grab a drink. When I came back, Dominic had moved. He was sitting more upright now, leaning forward slightly, elbows on his knees, watching me again. Not the TV. Me. "You want one?" I asked, holding up the extra bottle. He nodded. "Yeah, thanks." Our fingers brushed when I handed it to him. It was nothing, barely even contact. But he didn't pull away right away, and neither did I. It lasted maybe half a second longer than it should have. But in that half second, everything felt louder. Like my body suddenly decided to pay attention to every little detail. The warmth of his hand. The way his thumb shifted slightly against mine. The way his eyes flicked down, then back up. I let go first. Cleared my throat. Sat back down like nothing happened. But something had happened. I could feel it. The air between us had changed just slightly, but enough that I couldn't ignore it anymore. We tried to go back to normal after that. We really did. But the conversation got weird. Not awkward exactly. Just different. Slower. More careful. Like we were both thinking too much about what we were saying. At one point, he asked me about school basic stuff. Classes, plans, the usual. But he wasn't just listening. He was studying me, like he was trying to figure something out. And I didn't know why that made my pulse pick up. I told myself I was overthinking it. That this was nothing. Just like in those stories where everything starts normal before things slowly shift in ways you don't expect. But deep down, I knew this wasn't nothing, because Dominic wasn't acting like himself. And the worst part? I wasn't acting like myself either. At some point, the movie ended, but neither of us moved to put something else on. The screen just sat there, asking if we were still watching. Neither of us answered. The silence stretched. Heavy. Not uncomfortable, but not normal either. Then Dominic leaned back again. Slower this time, his arm finding its way behind me on the couch. Not touching, just close. Close enough that I could feel the heat from him. Close enough that if I shifted even slightly, I'd be leaning into him. I swallowed, staring at the screen. "Max," he said. My name sounded different in his voice now. Lower. More deliberate. "Yeah." There was a pause. Like he was deciding something. Then, "You ever feel like things change, and you don't really notice when it starts?" I frowned slightly, glancing at him. "What do you mean?" His eyes met mine again. And this time, he didn't look away at all. "I mean," he said quietly. One day everything's normal, and the next it's not. But nothing actually happened. My heart started beating faster, because that didn't feel like a random question. Felt like he was talking about this. About us. I don't know, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I guess yeah. He nodded slowly, still watching me, still not looking away. And then, almost like he couldn't stop himself, his hand shifted slightly behind me. Just enough that his fingers brushed my shoulder. Light, barely there, but intentional. I froze. Not because I wanted to pull away, but because I didn't. And I think he noticed that, because the next second, his fingers didn't move away. They stayed there, resting, waiting. And suddenly, I realized something I wasn't ready to admit out loud. This wasn't just Dominic acting strange. This was something else. Something we'd both been avoiding. Something that had probably been building longer than either of us wanted to admit. And now, we were alone. And there was nothing left to distract us from it. I didn't move. That was the first thing I noticed about myself. I just stayed there. Dominic's fingers were still resting on my shoulder. Light but firm enough that I could feel the weight of them through my shirt. Not accidental. Not something you could brush off as nothing. And yet, neither of us said anything. The silence stretched again, but this time it felt different. Thicker, like it was pressing in on us from all sides. You didn't answer, Dominic said quietly. His voice was closer now. I realized, with a small jolt, that he had leaned in just slightly. Not enough to be obvious, but enough that I could feel his presence more than before. I did, I said, my voice coming out a little tighter than I expected. I said yeah. He exhaled softly, almost like a quiet laugh. Not really. I turned my head toward him. Big mistake. Because now we were closer than we'd ever been before. Not in a joking, careless way. Not like when you bump into someone or lean over to grab something. This was intentional. His face was right there. Close enough that I could actually notice things I'd never paid attention to before: the faint stubble along his jaw. The way his eyes weren't as relaxed as usual. The tension sitting just beneath his calm expression. You're overthinking, I muttered, trying to break whatever this was. But even as I said it, I knew I was lying. Because I wasn't the only one overthinking. His hand shifted slightly on my shoulder. Not away, just adjusting. His fingers pressed a little more firmly this time. Am I? He asked. My throat felt dry. Yeah, I said, but it came out quieter now. Less certain. He held my gaze for a second longer. Then another. And then his eyes dropped. Just for a moment. To my lips. That tiny movement hit harder than anything else so far. Because it wasn't subtle anymore. It wasn't something I could explain away. It was exactly what it looked like. My heart started pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it. Dominic, I started. But I didn't even know what I was going to say. Because what could I say? Stop? Why? Nothing had technically happened. Not really. But everything felt like it was happening. Right now. In slow motion. He looked back up at me, and something in his expression had changed. The hesitation from earlier, it was still there. But now there was something else mixed in. Decision. Like he'd been holding something back all night, and he was finally running out of reasons to keep doing that. You don't feel it? He asked quietly. That question hit harder than it should have. Because I knew exactly what he meant. And I also knew I couldn't lie about it. But admitting it, that felt like crossing a line we couldn't come back from. I swallowed, looking away for a second, trying to gather myself. Trying to find something normal to say. I don't know what you're talking about, I muttered. We both knew it. Dominic let out a slow breath, and for a second, I thought maybe that was it. Maybe he'd drop it. Maybe we'd both pretend none of this ever happened. But then his hand moved. Not off my shoulder. Down. Slowly. From my shoulder to my upper arm. Still light. Still careful. But definitely moving. My entire body tensed. Not pulling away. Just reacting. And that reaction told him everything. Max, he said again, softer this time. I looked back at him. And yeah, there was no going back now. Because the way he was looking at me, that wasn't friendly. That wasn't casual. That was the same look I'd caught glimpses of all night, but now it was fully there. Unfiltered. You think I don't notice? He continued. The way you look at me sometimes? My chest tightened. I started. But he cut me off. Don't, he said quietly. Don't lie right now. His thumb shifted slightly against my arm. A small movement, but it sent a sharp wave of awareness through me. Because now I wasn't just aware of him. I was aware of everything. The closeness, the tension, the fact that we were alone, and no one was coming back anytime soon. And the fact that neither of us had moved away. Not once. You started this, he added, his voice lower now. That snapped something in me. What? I frowned. How? He gave a short, almost disbelieving huff. You really don't see it? No, I said. But again it sounded weak, because part of me did. All those small moments over the past few months. The looks, the lingering eye contact, the way I'd sometimes catch myself staring just a little too long. I thought I'd been subtle. Apparently I hadn't. Dominic leaned in just a fraction closer. Not enough to touch, but enough that there was barely any space left between us. You think I didn't notice the way you look at me when your brother's not around? He said quietly. My stomach dropped, because he was right, and hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way I wasn't ready for. I thought I was imagining it at first, he continued, but then it kept happening. His voice wasn't accusing. If anything, it sounded conflicted, like he'd been dealing with this on his own for a while. Dominic, I said again, but this time it came out more like a warning, or maybe a plea. I wasn't even sure anymore. Tell me I'm wrong, he said. Just that. Simple, direct, and impossible to answer. Because if I said yes, I'd be lying. And if I said no, everything would change. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything before. I could feel his breath now. Close, warm. And my body betrayed me again, leaning just slightly forward without me even realizing it. Just a little, but enough. Because his eyes flicked down again. And this time, he didn't look back up right away. And neither of us moved. But the distance between us, it was almost gone. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was both of us. Or maybe it just felt that way because the space between us had already been disappearing for the past 10 minutes. All I know is that 1 second we were just sitting there too close, not touching, and the next, there was no space left at all. My breath caught. Not because anything dramatic happened, but because it didn't. There was no sudden move, no rush, no clear moment where things crossed the line. It was just closeness, real closeness. Dominic's forehead almost brushed mine as he paused, like he was giving me one last chance to pull away. And I didn't. That was the moment everything shifted. Not when he moved closer. Not when his hand slid from my arm to my side, steady, grounding. But when I didn't stop him. When I stayed exactly where I was. His voice dropped even lower. Still think I'm overthinking? I let out a quiet breath that almost sounded like a laugh. But there was no humor in it. I think we should stop, I said. But I didn't move. And neither did he. Which made the words feel pointless the second they left my mouth. Dominic noticed that too. Yeah? He murmured. His hand tightened just slightly, not forceful. Just enough to make me aware of it. Then why aren't you moving? That hit harder than anything else. Because I didn't have an answer. Or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to say it out loud. My heart was racing, my thoughts all over the place, but my body felt completely still. Locked in place by something I didn't fully understand. Or maybe I did, and that was the problem. I don't know, I admitted finally. It was quiet, honest, and it changed something in his expression. The tension didn't disappear, but it softened. Just a little. Like he wasn't the only one standing on the edge anymore. Yeah, he said under his breath. Me neither. For a second, neither of us moved again. Just breathing. Just existing in that moment we probably shouldn't have let happen. Then Dominic leaned back. Not far. Just enough to look at me properly. And somehow that made it worse. Because now I could see everything clearly. The conflict, the hesitation, and something else underneath it. something that had been building for longer than tonight. You know this is a bad idea, I said. It sounded more like I was trying to convince myself than him. Yeah, he agreed immediately. No hesitation. No denial. That should have made it easier. Didn't, because he didn't move away after saying it. He stayed right there, still close, still watching me like he was waiting for something. And I realized something that made my stomach twist. We both knew it was a bad idea. We just didn't seem to care enough to stop. You're my brother's best friend, I added, quieter now. I know. And we're alone. I noticed. There was a faint hint of something in his voice, almost like a dry humor, but it didn't break the tension. If anything, it made it feel more real, more grounded, more dangerous. I let out a slow breath, dragging a hand through my hair. This shouldn't be happening. Another pause. Then tell me to leave. Simple, direct, and again, impossible. Because if I really wanted this to stop, that's exactly what I would have done. But I didn't. And he saw that. Of course he did. Dominic shook his head slightly, like he was frustrated, but not at me, at the situation, at himself. At least now I know I wasn't imagining it, he said. I frowned. What? The way you look at me, he replied. The way you act when it's just us. My chest tightened again. I thought I was going crazy for a while, he added, trying to ignore it. I swallowed. So why didn't you? He held my gaze, and this time, there was no hesitation at all when he answered. Because you didn't. That shut me up instantly. Because again, he wasn't wrong. All those small moments I brushed off, they weren't one-sided. They never were. The realization hit harder than I expected. This wasn't something that just started tonight. Tonight was just when we stopped pretending. The room felt too quiet, too still, like everything outside of this moment had just paused. And then Dominic shifted again. Not closer this time, just enough to rest back slightly into the couch. But his hand didn't leave my side. It stayed there, grounding, warm, real. And for some reason, that felt more intense than anything else. Max, he said, more steady now. Yeah. He hesitated, just for a second. Then, we don't have to do anything. That surprised me. I blinked at him. What? I mean it, he said. We can just sit here, figure out what this is. There was something different in his tone now. Less tension, more control, like he was trying to pull things back before they went too far. And maybe that's what we needed. A pause, a second to think. Because whatever this was, it wasn't simple, and it definitely wasn't going away. I nodded slowly. Yeah, okay. But even as I said it, neither of us moved away. Not even a little. We didn't just sit there. At least not in the way Dominic meant. Yeah, we stayed on the couch. Yeah, we didn't suddenly jump into anything or make some impulsive move. But the space between us, it never came back. His hand was still resting against my side, steady, warm, like it had always belonged there. And the more time passed, the more normal it started to feel. That was the dangerous part. Not the tension, not the almost moment from before, but how quickly my body stopped questioning it. How long have you noticed? I asked after a while. My voice sounded calmer now, but inside, my thoughts were still all over the place. Dominic didn't answer right away. I felt his thumb shift slightly against my side again, absent-minded this time, like he wasn't even thinking about it. A few months, he said finally. That made my chest tighten. Seriously? Yeah. I turned my head to look at him properly. And you just didn't say anything? He let out a quiet breath, almost like he was amused by the question. What was I supposed to say, Max? He replied. Hey, I think my best friend's little brother is looking at me like that? I winced slightly. Okay, when you say it like that. Exactly. There was a brief pause. Then he added, quieter. And I wasn't even sure at first. I frowned. About what? About you, he said. Or about me. That caught me off guard. What do you mean, about you or about me? He hesitated again. But this time it felt different. less like he was holding something back and more like he was deciding whether to finally say it. I didn't know if I was just reading into things, he admitted, or if I was noticing it because… He trailed off. Because what? He glanced at me, and there it was again. That look. Honest. Unfiltered. No more pretending. Because I wasn't exactly neutral about it either. That hit harder than anything else so far. Not the closeness. Not the almost touch earlier. That. Because up until now, part of me kept thinking maybe this was just me projecting. Reading too much into small moments. But this meant it went both ways. For a while. Without either of us saying anything. Wait, I said slowly, trying to process it. So you're telling me this whole time? Yeah, he nodded. I leaned back slightly, running a hand over my face. That's insane. A quiet huff of laughter left him. Yeah, it is. Another pause settled in, but this one felt different from before. Less tense. More real. Like we'd crossed past the uncertainty and landed somewhere neither of us expected. And you didn't stop coming over? I asked. That question came out more loaded than I intended. But Dominic didn't get defensive. He just looked at me. You didn't want me to. I opened my mouth to respond, then stopped. Because again, he wasn't wrong. I could have avoided him. Could have kept my distance. Could have shut it down before it ever got to this point. But I didn't. And now we were here. Alone. Too close. Having a conversation we definitely weren't supposed to be having. That doesn't make this any less messed up, I muttered. No, he agreed. It doesn't. But he still didn't move away. And neither did I. That contradiction sat between us. Heavy. Real. Unavoidable. What are we doing? I asked quietly. It wasn't really a question for him. It was more like I was thinking out loud. Trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense. Dominic shifted slightly beside me, not pulling away. Just adjusting so he was angled more toward me. I don't know, he admitted. For once, there was no confidence in his voice. No control. Just honesty. And weirdly, that made it easier to breathe. Because I wasn't the only one lost here. We both were. I let out a slow breath, staring ahead for a second before looking back at him. This changes things, I said. Yeah. With my brother. His jaw tightened slightly at that. I know. And with us. That made him pause. Then he nodded. Yeah. Another silence. But this one didn't feel suffocating. Felt heavy, but grounded. Like we were finally acknowledging what this actually meant. Not just the moment, but everything around it. The risk. The consequences. The fact that this wasn't just some random connection. This was complicated. Deeply. And neither of us could pretend otherwise anymore. After a while, Dominic finally moved his hand. For a split second, I thought he was pulling away. But instead, he shifted it slightly, more secure against my side. Not asking. Not pushing. Just there. And for some reason, that felt like more of a decision than anything else tonight. Max, he said quietly. Yeah. He hesitated. Then, we need to be careful. I nodded. Yeah. But even as we both agreed, neither of us created any distance. Not yet. Careful, I repeated under my breath. Like saying it out loud would somehow make it easier. Didn't. Because nothing about this felt careful. We were still sitting too close. Still not moving. Still acting like we hadn't just crossed some invisible line that had been there for years. And the worst part? It didn't feel wrong in the way it should have. Felt natural. That thought alone made my chest tighten. I shifted slightly on the couch, finally putting just a bit of space between us, not much. Just enough to breathe without feeling like every small movement meant something. Dominic noticed immediately. Of course he did. But he didn't react. Didn't pull me back. Didn't comment. He just let it happen. And for some reason, that made it harder. You ever think about what happens if he finds out? I asked. I didn't need to say who. We both knew. My brother. Dominic leaned back, resting his head against the couch for a second, staring at the ceiling like he was trying to organize his thoughts. Yeah, he said after a moment. More than I should. And he let out a quiet breath. And it doesn't end well. That was honest. Brutally honest. And exactly what I expected. I nodded slowly, looking down at my hands. Yeah, because there was no version of this where everything just worked out. Not cleanly. Not easily. There were too many layers. Too many ways this could go wrong. A long silence settled again, but this time it felt heavier. Not tense in the same way as before, but real. Grounded in consequences we couldn't ignore anymore. I don't want to screw things up with him, Dominic added. That made me look up. He wasn't looking at me this time, still staring at the ceiling. I know, I said quietly, and I don't want to screw things up with you either. That one hit differently. My chest tightened again, but not in the same anxious way as before. Something softer, more complicated. You already did, I said before I could stop myself. The words slipped out, not harsh, just honest. Dominic turned his head toward me immediately. There was no anger in his expression, just focus. What does that mean? He asked. I hesitated, because I didn't fully know myself. But I tried anyway. It means things aren't the same anymore, I said. We can't just go back to how it was before tonight. He studied me for a second, then nodded. Yeah, he said. I figured. Another pause. Then he pushed himself up slightly, leaning forward again, mirroring how he'd been sitting earlier in the night. But this time it wasn't tense. It was deliberate. So what do you want, Max? He asked. That question hit me off guard. Not because I hadn't thought about it, but because I had and I didn't have a clear answer. I don't know, I admitted, and that was the truth. Part of me wanted to shut this down, pretend it never happened, go back to normal even if normal would feel fake after this. But another part, the louder part, didn't want that at all. I mean it, he said, more serious now, because I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen. And I don't think you can either. I let out a slow breath. No, I said quietly. I can't. Then we figure it out, he said. Simple. Too simple, honestly. But the way he said it made it feel possible. Even if it wasn't. And what does figure it out even mean? I asked. He gave a small, almost tired smile. It means we don't rush into anything stupid, he said. And we don't lie to ourselves about what this is. I watched him for a second, trying to read him, trying to understand how he could sound so steady when everything felt anything but. You make it sound easy, I said. It's not, he replied immediately. At least he wasn't pretending. That's why we have to be careful. There was that word again. Careful. But now it sounded less like a warning and more like a plan. Or at least an attempt at one. I nodded slowly. Okay. The word felt small compared to everything it carried. But it was enough. For now. Another quiet moment passed between us. Then Dominic stood up. That caught me off guard. I looked up at him as he ran a hand through his hair, exhaling like he was trying to shake something off. I should probably go, he said. That made my stomach drop slightly. Not because I disagreed, but because I didn't expect to feel that way about it. Yeah, I said. Probably. Neither of us moved right away after that. He just stood there. I stayed on the couch. And for a second, it felt like neither of us actually wanted to end the night like this. Unfinished. Unclear. But maybe that was the point. Maybe it had to end like this, before we did something we couldn't take back. Dominic grabbed his keys from the table, then hesitated. Max. I looked up. Yeah. He held my gaze for a second. And there it was again. That same look from earlier. But softer now. Less intense. Still real. This isn't over, he said. Not a question. Not even really a statement. Just something in between. Something we both understood. I swallowed. Yeah, I said quietly. I know. He nodded once, then turned and walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click. And just like that, I was alone again. But everything felt different. Because the silence now, it wasn't empty. It was full of everything we didn't finish. I didn't sleep that night. Not even close. I tried. I really did. I lay there staring at the ceiling, phone in my hand, flipping between apps I wasn't even paying attention to. But my mind wouldn't shut up. Every second from earlier kept replaying. The way Dominic looked at me, the way his voice dropped when he said my name, the way neither of us moved away when we should have. It wasn't just one moment. It was all of it, layered, building, like something that had been sitting under the surface for way too long and finally cracked open. Around 2 a.m., I gave up pretending I was going to sleep. I sat up, ran my hands over my face, and just exhaled. Great, I muttered to myself. This is great. Except it wasn't, because now I had to deal with it. Not just what happened, but what it meant. And that was the part one couldn't figure out. My phone buzzed suddenly in my hand. My heart jumped way harder than it should have. I looked down. Dominic. Of course it was him. For a second, I just stared at the screen. Like not opening it would somehow make things simpler. Didn't. So I opened it. Dominic. You awake? I let out a short breath. Of course he wasn't sleeping either. I typed back before I could overthink it. Me, yeah. The reply came almost instantly. Dominic. Figured. I shook my head slightly, a small, tired smile pulling at the corner of my mouth. Of course he did. A few seconds passed. Then, Dominic. You okay? That question hit differently than I expected. Not what are we doing? Not about earlier. Just, you okay? I stared at the message for a second before answering. Me, I don't know. That felt like the only honest answer. Typing, then stopping, then typing again. I could almost picture him on the other end, doing the same thing I was. Finally, Dominic, yeah, same. I leaned back against the headboard, letting my phone rest against my chest for a second. This felt weirdly easier. Talking like this, no pressure, no proximity, no way to accidentally lean in too close or say something with just a look. Just words. Simple, clear, safer, but not by much. My phone buzzed again. Dominic, we should probably talk about it. There it was. I sighed quietly. Me, yeah, probably. Another pause. Then, Dominic, not like that. I mean, actually talk. I frowned slightly at the screen. Me, we are talking. A few seconds. Then, Dominic. You know what I mean? Yeah. I did. He meant face to face. Real conversation. No distractions. No pretending. And that made my chest tighten again. Because texting was easy. Seeing him again? That was something else. Still, I typed. Me, when? This time, the reply took longer. Long enough that I almost thought he changed his mind. Then, Dominic. Tomorrow? I exhaled slowly. Tomorrow. That felt fast. But also necessary. Because there was no way we could just ignore this and go back to normal. Not after tonight. Me, yeah. Okay. A pause. Then one more message. Dominic, Max. I stared at his name on the screen. Me, yeah? The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then finally, Dominic. I meant what I said earlier. My chest tightened. I didn't need to ask what part. I knew. This isn't over. I swallowed, fingers hovering over the screen before typing back. Me, I know. And I did. That was the problem. A few seconds later. Dominic. Get some sleep. I let out a quiet breath. Me, you too. The conversation ended there. No dramatic finish. No big conclusion. Just unfinished. Again. I set my phone down on the nightstand and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow. We were actually going to sit down and talk about this. No distractions. No avoiding it. Just the truth. And for some reason, that felt more intense than anything that happened tonight. Because tonight, we could pretend it was a moment, a slip, something that just happened. But tomorrow we'd have to decide what it actually meant, and whether we were willing to deal with the consequences. I closed my eyes, finally feeling the exhaustion catch up to me. But even as sleep started pulling me under, one thought stayed stuck in my head. This wasn't over. Not even close. I saw him the next day at exactly 4:12 p.m. I remember the time because I checked it 3 times before walking over. He was already there, leaning against the hood of his car like he had been for a while, arms crossed, sunglasses on even though the sun wasn't that bright. Waiting. For me. And just seeing him like that made everything from last night hit all over again. The looks, the tension, the fact that nothing about this was simple anymore. I almost turned around. Not even joking, I actually slowed down for a second, thinking this is a bad idea, I should just leave. But then he noticed me. Of course he did. Straightened up slightly, pushing himself off the car. And just like that, there was no backing out. "Hey," he said. Simple. Normal. Like we weren't about to have the most uncomfortable conversation of our lives. "Hey," I replied. We stood there for a second. Awkward. Not in a loud way, just quiet, heavy. Like we were both waiting for the other one to start. Dominic pulled his sunglasses off, running a hand through his hair. "You want to sit?" he asked, nodding toward the small park across the street. I shrugged. "Yeah, sure." We walked over together, not touching, not too close but still aware of each other in a way that hadn't been there before. Everything felt intentional now. We sat on a bench. A little space between us this time. Not like last night. That was probably a good thing. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Just watching people pass by, like we were trying to delay what we both knew was coming. Then finally, "So," Dominic said, exhaling slowly, "we should probably not avoid it." I let out a quiet breath. "Yeah." Another pause. Then I said it before I could overthink it. "What do you want?" Same question he asked me yesterday. Now it was his turn. Dominic didn't answer right away. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, looking down at the ground. Thinking. "I want," he started, then stopped, shook his head a little. "See, that's the problem," he admitted. "Because what I want and what makes sense are two different things." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I get that." He glanced at me, and there it was again. That honesty. No pretending anymore. "I shouldn't want this," he said. "You know that." "I do. And I definitely shouldn't act on it." I let out a small breath. "Also true." A faint, almost ironic smile crossed his face. "Glad we're on the same page." But neither of us sounded convinced. Because if we were really on the same page, we wouldn't be here, having this conversation, still not walking away. "So then what?" I asked quietly. He looked at me again. And this time, there was no hesitation. "We set boundaries," he said. That surprised me. "Boundaries?" "Yeah," he nodded. "We don't pretend this didn't happen. But we also don't let it turn into something that blows everything up." I frowned slightly. "That sounds easier said than done." "It is," he admitted. At least he was honest. "But it's the only way this doesn't go completely wrong." I leaned back slightly, thinking about it. Boundaries. It made sense. In theory. But in reality, after last night, after everything we didn't do but almost did, that means no more moments like that, I said. His jaw tightened slightly. "Yeah. And we don't," I stopped myself, but he already knew. "Yeah," he said again, quieter this time. A heavier silence settled between us. Because now it was real. Not just tension. Not just confusion. A decision. Something we were actually choosing. Even if it wasn't what either of us fully wanted. I nodded slowly. "Okay." The word felt final. But also a not. Because even as we agreed, I could feel it. That same pull from last night. Still there. Still unresolved. And I knew he felt it too. Dominic stood up first this time. Like he needed to put some physical distance between us before things slipped again. "I mean it, Max," he said. "We have to be smart about this." I stood up too. "Yeah." We faced each other for a second. Closer than we probably should have been. Again. And for a brief moment, felt exactly like last night, like we were right back on that edge, one small move away from crossing it. But this time, we didn't. Dominic took a step back first, breaking it, choosing it. "See you around," he said. Normal words, but they carried more weight now. "Yeah," I replied. "See you." He nodded once. then turned and walked away, and I just stood there for a second, watching him go, feeling that same unfinished tension sitting heavy in my chest. But also something else. Clarity. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Because this wasn't some random moment, and it wasn't going to disappear. We just chose not to let it take over. At least for now. And as I finally turned and walked the other way, one thought stuck with me. Some things don't end. They just change shape. And this definitely wasn't over. Not really. Just